Thank you for coming so early. I know it's the first session. Ansgar and I are going to talk about why Ethereum's issuance policy is unsustainable, in our opinion. And for some of you who might have been at Justin's talk, presenting his idea of the Beam chain, one of the items that is part of that roadmap is smarter issuance, as he refers to it. And he put a little spicy emojicon next to it. And it didn't take long to understand why this topic tends to be spicy. It was the most upvoted question in the Q&A. Why are ETH researchers obsessed with lowering issuance? And we're here to kind of answer this question and argue for why we think we need to change issuance. So let's begin by just looking at the current staking trend. It's been a relatively straight affair, up only. So here you see basically the amount of stake in the system, and it's been trending upwards at a fairly constant rate. And the question is obviously, where does this trend go? Will it continue? When will it stop? What does it look like in the long run? And to kind of answer this question, we're going to have to argue a bit about kind of staking supply and demand, and to be able to reason about what an equilibrium looks like. So in this setting, the demand curve is what we call the issuance curve. It's basically the protocol's willingness to pay validators to secure the chain. And that function is very well defined. We know exactly at what point how much validators earn as yield, if they perform correctly, of course. And then the supply is basically the willingness of ETH holders to do that work, to do the validation for different levels of yield. And so what we see here is basically the demand curve, which is the issuance curve. And to kind of quickly run through this intuition here, why it's designed the way it's designed right now, is that for what you see here is that there's a downwards trend. As more and more ETH is staked, the protocol pays validators less and less yield. But at the same time, one property here that you can see is for very low levels of staking, the issuance yield is very high. Basically, the intuition here is the protocol really needs to make sure that we have a minimum amount of security in the system, and so it pays a lot for that. And as more and more ETH gets staked, kind of the urgency of needing to kind of recruit more validators goes down. And it goes down, but it kind of flattens out, and so that leaves us in this awkward spot that we don't really know where we actually end up in the long run. So what happened so far is basically this upwards only trend where more and more people stake, and what that means in a supply and demand context is that the supply curve has been shifting downwards over time. And now the question is, where does this end up in the long run? And one reason behind the fact that kind of why we might end up in a sort of high percentage staked world is this what we call the flattening effect. And the idea here is basically that for solo stakers to stake, the kind of costs are very heterogeneous. And mostly it's the fact that some people are very good with computers, some people not so much. And so to recruit the last person on Earth, or like the last ETH holder on Earth, to sort of go through the pain of setting up a server and like running their own validating node is extremely costly. You would need to pay a lot. Whereas with sort of delegated stake, that cost is very homogeneous, meaning it's just a one-click solution for everyone. And so the kind of, obviously the preference is still different, so it is an upward sloping supply curve, but it's basically significantly flattened. And again, in the supply and demand context, what this basically means is that with a flatter supply curve, you end up with more stake in the system in equilibrium, given a demand curve. Now, basically, the question is, where do we end up in the long run? And that's not, because we don't know the supply curve, we can only observe it at any sort of point in time. We know that today X amount of stake is in the system, roughly 34 million, so roughly 30% of all ETH. And so basically, at the very least, given the whole kind of trend with LSTs and liquid staking, it is very plausible that we, over time, kind of continue trending to the right in terms of staking participation. And because the demand curve, so the issuance curve, is so kind of just relatively flat towards the end and doesn't kind of conclusively go to zero or anything like that, we don't really know where, and you can see that a very small change in yield can have a dramatic impact on the sort of equilibrium staking level. And now I'm going to let Ansgar continue.
Yeah, and the second section, we call that nominal versus real yield. So we've been giving like talks like this over the past half a year, basically, at a few conferences. And this is always the one section where, in the end, when we talk to people, people are always just a little bit confused by it and didn't really understand what we were trying to say in that section. So we tried to restructure it a little bit experimentally. And we'll still show like proper yield curves, but I wanted to start with like a very simple mental model first. And specifically, I really think that there's two, I call them anomalies for proof of stake accounting, that mean that I think most people's mental models for like how much yield you earn in proof of stake are just fundamentally slightly off. And to explain that a little bit more, again, simple model. So basically, just let's look first at a normal, any real-world example where you have a large group of people paying a small group of people, right? Everyone here takes some coins, gives them over to the other group. Very simple, right? And if you run the analysis, like you could imagine, I don't know, that's a retirement fund or something. A lot of people pay in, few people get a payout or something, and you make the analysis like who basically gained, who lost, or like who paid, who received. It's a very simple analysis, right? Everyone here paid a little bit. Those two gained quite a bit. Simple accounting here. If you go to first proof of work, because that's where the first anomaly shows up. It's a bit of a different model, right? So we have these people, they now like they say these are all ETH holders pre-merge, right? They all have their own balance. You have these miners. These miners need to be incentivized for their work. So what we do is we give them coins. But this time, those coins didn't come from anywhere, right? We minted them. And so that's the first anomaly. That's basically that we blockchain networks, we often pay for expenses by just minting new coins. Now that's no magic, right? It's not magically coming out of nowhere. It's still a payment from those people to those people, right? But it's an indirect payment, basically, because you're now being paid by being diluted, right? That is accounting-wise, it's accounting-wise the same thing as if you're just given coins over directly, but it basically instead takes this indirect step. And the way you can think about it is, right, like the balances here didn't change, but because there's now more coins in existence in general, everything shrinks a little bit, right? So that's the way, basically, same thing. Again, it's just a different way of doing accounting, but it does make it a little bit harder to track what's going on. Now, proof of work, that's still fine. Proof of stake adds one other kind of weird addition to that accounting model. Of course, wait, that's obvious, right? Like those people still paid a little bit, and then those people gained. So now proof of stake adds a second anomaly to this model, and that is that there are no miners anymore, right? And that's great. You know, I think it's great that we were able to do that. But now, who actually is doing the work? Who's being paid here, right? And it turns out that actually in proof of stake, of course, the people that actually do the work are some of the stakers, some of the holders themselves, right? Some of the people with ETH, in this case, I don't know, half of them. Of course, right now we are more like at a third or something. Some of them actually are stakers, are doing the work. And just to give a little bit more room, let's separate them out a little bit. And so now same thing again, right? Like they do stake, they fulfill their duties and they're getting paid, right? So let's pay them. Okay, so then again, same thing, same question. What happened here? Like where did this money come from, right? Same answer, of course. Dilution, so let's shrink everything. And then we can run the analysis again. And we can run the analysis and we can say, well, everyone here paid for the security. And then those guys actually got extra money, and of course, if you do the accounting, like everyone lost a little bit because they paid for the security. Those two gained more. So on balance, you still make a profit if you stake. Of course, right? That makes sense. But for example, in this example, we have 4 new coins. We have 4 people. So basically, everyone got diluted by 1 coin on average, right? So basically, I chose this example just because actually, if you look at this here, it's very simple. If you ask, like, how much did you actually earn? You did not, like, you see two new coins, but the first coin here offsets the dilution. The second coin is the earning. So the actual answer would be your staking yields in this picture is one coin. Now there is one annoying fact. I don't know how many of you all have ever paid taxes for staking, but if you're a solo staker, you just pay taxes for the 2 coins, right? Because that is how much your balance went up. Now, in many countries, it's a bit better. There are countries where, like, you know, the top tax rate on income, if that's taxed income, is around 50%. In that world, you literally have lost the 1 coin that was your real income just now, you know? So 50% staked, it's already getting quite uncomfortable with kind of this dilution effect. And I just wrote it down here, so the two accounting anomalies that make it a little bit hard to talk about proof of stake, kind of the payment via new coins, and then the recipients are also paying. And so what you see in terms of yield is not what you get. And actually, I think, you know how a couple of years ago when we first had ICOs, people only looked at like floating supply, right? And at some point, we all in the industry were like, wait, that's not the right way of doing accounting. Actually, we need total, like fully diluted volume of the coins, right? And that took a while, but by now that's the standard metric. And I would say we really need the same thing with staking rewards as well. If someone tells you, hey, our network pays 7% staking yields, but we also have 70% staked, you should actually think, so I'm getting 2% staking yields, not 7%, right? That actually makes a big difference. Now, so far, that's not an argument for like anything about Ethereum in particular. It's just like some annoying aspect about how to, you know, do accounting for proof of stake. And actually, if someone tries to maybe convince the tax authorities that actually they should only pay taxes on one of those 2 coins, I think that would, in principle, be a very sound argument, but not a tax advisor. But like now, let's go back to actual yield curves, you know, and like proper economics. Like this is the same curve from just now. Like this tells you, depending on how much total stake there's in the system, we have roughly 120 million ETH in total. This tells you how much you earn or how much you think you earn, right? Like this is the nominal. That's why we call it the nominal yield. How much the protocol, how much your balance goes up every year. Now we can just take that, and one point there is that your incentive to come in and stake at any level, right, is always the difference between earning that yield and earning 0, right? That's pretty trivial. So now let's adjust that for the real yield, and that shifts the curve down. And it should be relatively intuitive why it shifts the curve down. Like towards the left, if barely anyone stakes, right, there's barely any dilution. So towards the left, those 2 curves are basically the same. If we have 10% staked, like the amount your balance goes up, that's roughly what you actually earn in staking. Towards the right, if everyone stakes, it's not like the system breaks. Like if everyone stakes, it still works, but everyone's balance goes up by the same amount every year, and that doesn't actually create any value, right? So you don't actually earn anything anymore. At that point, basically staking is just a duty for the entire network. And one point I just wanted to make there, because sometimes people ask about that, that does not mean that the security of the network is in any way broken, because your incentive to stake is still always the difference between staking and not staking. And as you can see, I kind of plotted the real ETH yield here. Like, so basically, if you just hold ETH, you know, you're getting diluted every year. So like basically, the gap between those 2 curves still stays the same as before. So the incentive to come in is still the same, like as you would have thought from the nominal graph, but it just means that it comes from a different thing. First, it comes from the potential to earn profit, and then towards the right side, it comes just from avoiding to be diluted. And so that's kind of the summary slide here. So basically, we have a spectrum of different paradigms of staking. You can have staking set up as something that actually generates profits, potentially, of course, you know, for stakers, or you can set it up as just a duty for the entire protocol. Both of those work for the protocol. So if we just reason from what's best for Ethereum, both of those work. But we have to be aware, and I personally think, talking to a lot of stakers, that actually once you kind of like try to make that point, people tend to really prefer the world where actually staking is a profitable activity. And one side argument there is that we always make is like, if we want to go to the other world instead, and we want to just everyone participate in staking, we should design Ethereum explicitly with that in mind. And then the last point, of course, it's that it's still all incentive compatible. So yeah, sorry, this was like a little bit, I tried again this now to give you the stickman intuition. Hopefully that helped a little bit better understand what we mean when we talk about nominal versus real yield, but that's basically our first argument for like why, if we do nothing, we'll keep sliding more and more and change the character of staking from profit-driven to just an accounting mirage. So if you want.
Right.
Oh, wait. These are two, because, you know, from Caspar is our memer in chief, and so he always like comes up with these images, and I always forget about mentioning them. So that's kind of supposed to illustrate, you know, like there's the staking mechanism. Once we get to like almost everyone stakes, right? It becomes this like purely cyclical thing where you think, you know, coins come down the waterfall, but then it turns out that it's the same coins that just went in, right? So basically, there's like demonstrating that, and then, you know, if you have to pay taxes, even worse. So yeah, and now over to you.
Thank you, Ansgar, for explaining my meme. Third, okay, final section. So what's the problem with all of this, right? Ansgar basically just explained the whole, why we should pay attention to nominal versus real yield, and how sort of staking becomes sort of a profitable activity to kind of being quasi forced onto you economically by basically, if you don't want to be diluted, it becomes this duty, actually. And so I'm going to, as you see, there's a bunch of reasons that we've gone through in various iterations of different talks. So if you're interested in like different points, you can talk to us after the talk or find it online. But I'm going to focus on basically the network effects of money, and then we have a little bonus one. And I think the network effects of money are really crucial. And so what do I mean when I talk about this? So basically, money has network effects, and that also applies to ETH, it applies to LSTs, and in some sense, basically, one way to think about it is what makes money attractive. Money is attractive, for example, if you can trade it at good execution. Sort of this kind of mental model is liquidity begets liquidity. So as you are a liquid asset, people are incentivized to come to your asset to have that good execution. And in some sense, ETH and LSTs are in competition, in the sense that they somewhat represent similar things. LSTs are a derivative. Obviously, there's like slashing risk and sort of counterparty risk if you do it in a mediated way. But the whole point here is that basically LSTs have network effects, and these network effects kind of lead to this winner-takes-most dynamic, where it's likely that in the long run that one LST will kind of win as the money on that LST in that LST market. And what that then implies is that if we end up in a world where a lot of the ETH is staked, say 80% hypothetically, what does that mean? So you have 20% raw ETH that is still in circulation, and 80% is mostly going to be dominated by LSTs, because unfortunately there's only so many solo stakers. Basically then what happens is that the dominant LST is basically going to be the de facto money of Ethereum, replacing raw ETH. And what that means is that we're adding a permanent trust layer to Ethereum. So as an ETH holder, you come to Ethereum and you kind of faced with the question, do I want to hold this very expensive, maximally trustless asset that is ETH? Or am I going to kind of not be the only silly one in town that is getting diluted and hold an LST that is actually, at that point, even more liquid than ETH? Because in a market where 80% of is dominated by LSTs, then those LSTs are going to be the ones most liquid on decentralized exchanges. It might even the NFTs might be denominated in that dominant LST, etc., etc. And so it really becomes this permanent trust layer that we're kind of economically obviously it's not enforced onto anyone, but it's kind of economically quasi-enforced. And you're kind of sort of bullied into holding this trusted asset, and we're losing this maximally trustless raw ETH as the main money of Ethereum. And I mean, as a side point, also as for ETH, the asset, this is also a sort of huge concession in terms of monetary premium, giving up on that kind of maximally trustless vision. On that point, we're actually going to give a talk next Saturday with a bit more focus on that topic at the Bankless Summit. And then, since we're up with time, let me quickly talk about this sort of principal-agent problem. So basically, at the very beginning, before basically the initial people that staked were almost kind of crazy lunatics. You didn't even know when the merge would happen. People still went ahead and staked. They were like basically, yeah, crazy cool. And then the more kind of like sort of the less risk-friendly solo stakers came in, and then LSTs kind of kicked in, and sort of what I'm trying to get at here is that there is a spectrum of sort of who is actually running the software, which of the stakers are actually sort of running the software themselves, and as you kind of go on that spectrum, there's more and more intermediation. So LSTs there's people staking with Rocket Pool or Lido, for example, on chain are pretty close to kind of the risk trade-off and are aware. And then Coinbase and centralized exchanges, it gets more and more abstracted away. It becomes this one-click thing. You don't even know what's actually happening. It becomes less and less a conscious decision. And then one reason why we added this as a bonus was yesterday there was the news that one of the ETFs just bought a staking service provider. And effectively, the capital that is being staked is less and less sort of close to the actual staking. They don't even know what happens in the back end anymore. And so, I mean, one obvious question here, the elephant in the room is, so what can we do about all of this? Basically changing the issuance curve. This is our tool of how we can kind of control the staking ratio, and with a high staking ratio, as we just discussed, there's like a bunch of negative externalities, and so there's different kind of approaches. There's a sort of progressive yield reduction, which one of our colleagues, Anders, is going to talk about, I think, in maybe 2 hours or something. And then there's also ideas of curves that actually go to zero to sort of meaningfully kind of constrain the amount of stake that would plausibly enter the staking set. And then we have the second sort of question of what kind of staking range do we actually find desirable? I think there's kind of arguments for why a low range is preferable than levels to similar today, like 25%, or sort of more closer to 50%. Obviously, there is basically no true value. It's a trade-off space, and it's a big topic, and we're going to talk a lot about this in the coming sessions and future talks. But yeah, I think we wanted to really focus on why we think we need to change it, and then hopefully we'll get to actually change it eventually. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have some short minutes to answer the most voted question, and that would be, what should the ideal percentage of staked ETH be? For example, if we are at 20%, what ideal number do we want to equalize at?
All right, so that was a little bit on the last slide. It's tricky because there's two versions of the question. The one is like, if we were to design the system completely from scratch before anyone starts staking, what number would we choose? And there, I think, as we said, like initially the system was designed with solo stakers in mind. With solo stakers only, we would never go above 5–10% of ETH stake maybe, because just not so many people are sophisticated enough to run their own local setup. And that would exactly be these like 5–10% of like enthusiasts that really also care about the network, right? Those would be exactly the people we would want in the system the most. it's unclear whether, now we're already at 30% staked. It's unclear whether we can actually get back down to that level in a way that doesn't actually hurt existing stakers too much or drives out solo stakers. Then the next best thing could be like maybe try to stay equalized at today's level, except that forever, basically out of every 3 coins you earn, 1 of them will be fake and just account for dilution. Or potentially, if it takes us for a long time to find a solution here, or the process with the community, like of all of us coming to agreement takes a lot of time, we might have to try to like basically just cut off as basically late in the process as we, then find an agreement on, which might be closer to 50%.
Great. Let's jump on to the next one. Let me check. What's the highest vote? Will restaking worsen this issue?
We gave a talk about this. I'm not sure if it's online. Is it online?
Yes, it's online.
It's online.
There's also a website, issuance.whatthefuck, where all resources on the topic are listed, and also that talk.
And basically, restaking is only yet another source. It's similar to MEV in a sense. There's different types of restaking. Some of them don't really affect this at all. The ones that do are what we call basically proposer-specific restaking yield. That's things like pre-confirmations, things where basically your role in the protocol is what gives you access to that yield. But those can be addressed. We didn't talk about it in this talk, but there is this kind of upcoming proposal for a feature called MEV burn. The more precise term would actually be proposer-specific yield burn, and that would capture both the existing MEV and the relevant portion of the restaking yield, so that basically, yes, it worsens the problem a little bit, but it also, we have already the tools for addressing it.
Okay, then I think one last, is an enshrined LST a solution?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but like basically the idea is here, we just want to be intentional. And also like, the other question of like, why didn't we do it at the start of the beacon chain? Well, because no one thought about the kind of the tail end of staking. Everyone just thought about how do we make sure there's at least 5% of ETH staked. And so I think now the point is, okay, we have a mature understanding of proof of stake. Now we want to really design for the end game, or at least, like as close as we can get to that. And for that, basically, we just have to make the intentional choice. Hey, do we want lowest percent staked and it is actually income you can earn? Do we want to embrace, 100% staked, but then let's redesign the system and enshrine some sort of LST mechanism, which, by the way, would not mean that Lido or Rocket Pool would go out of business. Like you still need all of that on top, but basically the core mechanism we could enshrine, which would make that part trustless. So we would at least end up with an LST that is a trustless LST in the system. But then let's make that choice. And in that world, of course, yes, stakers no longer actually earn money directly, right? It becomes a duty for all ETH holders. If we like that, if we prefer that world over the 10% or 20% staked, let's make that choice and properly design for it instead of just being passively pushed into it because when the beacon chain launched, we didn't anticipate we would go this way.